Everyone. We're going to give a few minutes for people to get logged in. In the meantime, we have some music from Ernesto and Domingo Kilban's Guitar and Bandurria Duo 1 CD. The song we will listen to is Binatang Paliquero. It is the same song that played during the welcome last week. Thank you, and we'll begin our program shortly. Magandang gabi and good evening, everyone. My name is Veronica Porter, and I'll be your MC for the evening. Thank you for joining FANHS Oregon and Malaya Movement Portland as we bring this year's Filipino American History Month to a close with our BAYANI 2020 Honoring Our Heroes, a three-part webinar series celebrating the rich history of Filipino Americans, past, present, and future. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I would like to review some webinar reminders. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. Please remain on mute. Send your questions and comments in the chat box. If you would like to learn more about FANHS Oregon and Malaya Movement Portland, email us at oregonfans@gmail.com and malayapdx@gmail.com. Next slide, please. The program for this evening is very close to my heart, and I'm very excited to share in this with you all. We will start by honoring our heroes in a moment of silence. We'll recapture the past and present segments of our webinar series. We will look at the Filipino American History Month proclamations. We will have a cultural sharing. We'll look at the future with Malaya Movement Portland. We will have our final gift giveaway announcement, and then we'll have our closing and talk about where do we go from here. And next slide, please. So as we begin our program, it is with this recognition of Filipino Americans that we would like to take a moment of silence to honor all our heroes, those whose names are listed and those who are not. You are all our heroes, past, present, and future. Next slide, please. And now for a moment of silence. Thank you to all our frontliner workers, essential workers, activists, and volunteers who serve the Filipino community. Next slide, please. And with this offering of thanks and gratitude, we wanted to also take a moment to bring attention to a press release that was sent earlier this day from Rosella De Leon, the Executive Director of the Foundation for Philippine Progress, regarding the Foundation's appeal for a timely response as 2020's strongest storm, Typhoon Goni, also known as Roli, slams the Philippines. An ordinary cyclone from the Pacific Ocean quickly transformed into a super typhoon in just 24 hours. The Typhoon Warning Center in Pearl Harbor categorized Typhoon Goni, Roli, the Philippine name, as a compact but very powerful system that is expected to slam into the eastern provincial regions of Quezon and Bicol this Sunday, Manila time, following a previous typhoon that happened last week, which brought heavy rains and flooding to Luzon. Next slide, please. Upon landfall, peak winds are expected to be at a Category 5, level of 150 miles per hour or greater, and the local Philippine forecasters are predicting storm surges as high as 6.5 to 8 feet. This is reminiscent of the 2014 Super Typhoon Haiyan that devastated the provinces of Leyte and Samar. Typhoon Roli is expected to wreak similar havoc. This could not have come at a more critical time. The double whammy will severely impact what is already a fragile situation in the Philippines, where vulnerable communities are still dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. As thousands of people seek shelter from the storm, there is the risk of overcrowding evacuation centers that will most likely be filled to capacity. Serious consequences also face those who are in remote barrios in times like this because of the difficult travel conditions and limited access to transportation. Next slide, please. The Foundation for Philippine Progress is appealing to all nationwide organizations and individuals who would like to proactively extend the needed help that will be a result of this heavy calamity. There will be a host of extreme risks and danger, not only from the onset of a deadly typhoon, but the lingering deathly shadow of the COVID-19 virus on communities already struggling from hunger, according to Dr. Alma Trinidad, president of the Foundation for Philippine Progress's board of directors. And we can also see this quote from the executive director of the foundation, Rosella De Leon, that they've been partnering with local U.S. organizations like the Filipino American Association of Eugene and Springfield in Oregon, the Filipino American Association of Portland and vicinity, and the Philippine Nurses Association of Oregon and Washington during the Taal operations. And for this current typhoon, they would like to reach out to more organizations and institutions nationwide and funneling their donations through the foundation to get the relief to where it is most needed in the Philippines. And so for all of you that are interested in reading more of the statement and making donations, please visit the philippineprogress.org. And again, thank you to all of those who are able to support in these efforts. Next slide, please. We'll now enter the recap of our program so far to really bring things full circle. In our first installment, we took a look into the past and explored where we come from and honored our heroes that have brought us this far. We got to hear from Commissioner Lori Stegman, from our wonderful speaker from Migrante Portland, as we sailed the 4 waves of Filipino migration and remembered the contributions of some of our Filipino American heroes of the past. We learned the history of FANHS Oregon and the important task of capturing Filipino American history. And we were honored with the many talents of our Filipino American youth who danced, sang, read, and even shared their original work with us. And so if you missed this segment, you can watch the recording on both the FANHS Oregon chapter and Malaya Movement Pacific Northwest Facebook pages. Next slide, please. And so we really learned so much in that first installment about FANHS and all the work that they've been doing and how they've been able to gain recognition in the cities of Salem and Kaiser and the state of Oregon in recognizing Filipino American History Month in October. And so we thought it would be really great to actually hear the state's proclamation for this month in which we commemorate. Next slide, please. We are honored to welcome Kim Louise Roland, who will be sharing Governor Kate Brown's proclamation commemorating Filipino American History Month. Kim is 21 years old, born in Cebu City, Philippines. She is the president of Kaibigan, the Filipino American Student Association at Portland State University. Kim's mother and Kim moved to Portland in 2008 when Kim was 9 years old. Kim has been living in Portland ever since and has even been able to retain their native language, which is a really beautiful thing that not many of us of the Filipino diaspora are really able to retain, learn, or even maintain at times. And so in introducing Kim, Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here tonight. I will now begin the State of Oregon Proclamation, Office of the Governor. Whereas October 2020 marks the 433rd anniversary of the earliest document proof of Filipino presence in the shores of the west coast of the continental United States. And whereas in Oregon, thousands of Filipino Americans have made contributions to the fields of teaching, business, government service, agriculture, ministry, medicine, science, humanities, and the U.S. military. And whereas it is imperative for Filipino American youth to have positive role models and instill in them the importance of education complemented with the richness of their ethnicity and values of their legacy. And whereas efforts must continue to promote the study of Filipino American history and culture because of the role of Filipino Americans have been overlooked in the writing, teaching, and learning of U.S. history. And whereas this anniversary is a significant time to study the advancement of Filipino Americans, a time of celebration, remembrance, reflection, and motivation, and a relevant time for all Oregonians to learn about and appreciate Filipino Americans and their historic contributions to our state and our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for reading and sharing the Oregon's Filipino American History Month proclamation for us. Next slide, please. In our second installment, we moved into the present and took account of where we are now and how the Philam community comes together time and time again in the face of adversity. We learned about so many different Filipino community organizations and the work the Filipino community in Oregon is doing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and other basic human rights and needs struggles at this time. Next slide, please. And so in last week's segment, we heard from Commissioner Shushila Jayapal. We had a cultural reading of Troy Osaki's Omang Kasama from Anakbayan member Junix. And we got to learn about so many different Filipino American organizations that are here in Oregon. We got to learn about Anakbayan Portland. We learned about so many of the different Filipino American associations that exist in Portland and vicinity, Vancouver, Washington, Greater Salem, the High Desert, and Eugene and Springfield. And we also want to recognize that there are numerous Filipino American associations in Oregon that did not get to be recognized just due to time constraints and being under a pandemic and everything shifting online. So we do want to recognize that not all of the associations were able to be referenced in these programs, but please do send FANHS Oregon any information that you would like to share and the stories that you would like to tell about what you all have been doing during this time, because we know that there is really a large Filipino community here in Oregon, though we are spread out throughout the state. And so other organizations that we have been able to recognize in addition to those associations listed is the Philippine Nurses Association of Oregon and Washington, and then also the Filipino American Friendship Club. And then they had actually shared a video with us. And so we do want to take a moment to honor and respect that submission and share that with all of you now. So if we could move to the next slide, please. And we'll go ahead and play this wonderful video from the Filipino American Friendship Club.
We are the Filipino American Friendship Club of Oregon. I am Cecilia Sacaton Maraki, current president and daughter of two former presidents, Lito and Medi Sacaton. Our officers would like to thank the Filipino American National Historical Society Oregon chapter and Malaya Movement Portland for including us in their Filipino American History Month celebration, BAYANI 2020, honoring our heroes. Since our founding families came together in 1978, some things have changed and some things remain, but at the heart of it all is our love for our Filipino heritage, our wish to celebrate it with each other, and our wish to share it with our children. We have created a community, a family, a barkada that continues on. We continue to enjoy enduring events such as the Easter egg hunt and the beloved Christmas pageant and talent show. Our children's dance troupe connects our children to our Filipino roots, but also cultures of other countries, with invitations to perform our folk dances at international events. We are inspired to keep clicking our tinikling sticks and can say we have started to teach our fourth generation members.
Hello, I'm Jeanette Villegas, Internal Vice President of FAFC. We also come together for community events such as Adopt a Road, and for many years enthusiastically cheered on the Philippines girls softball team during the Little League World Series at Alpen Rose Dairy. Our highlight for 2019 was bringing back our beloved debutante ball. 12 young women and their 12 escorts delighted us with touching waltz and elegant rigodon they perfected over 6 months of Sunday practices. We are looking forward to our 10th debutante ball in 2022. Maple Chong Class, who was part of the first debutante ball in 1986, is serving as our chair. Year 2020 has put a pause to our usual gatherings, so instead we have pivoted with an outreach we call Project Pandesal. It is an ongoing project to bring delicious pandesal from St. Barbara Bakery to our senior members and send off our high school seniors with a cookbook, Philippine Recipes Made Easy, written by one of our former members. We thank you for sharing your time with us today and hope to connect with those interested in learning more about the Filipino American Friendship Club of Oregon. Please visit our website, fafcoregon.org, and send us a message or questions. Congratulations to the Filipino American National Historical Society Oregon Chapter and Malaya Movement Portland for bringing us together to recognize our Filipino American heroes of 2020.
Thank you so much, Filipino American Friendship Club.
We are the Filipino American Friendship.
I know that the Project Pandesal program has to be amazing because, I mean, who doesn't want pandesal during this time? And so with that, let's go ahead and move to the next slide and finish recapturing the different organizations we got to talk about last week. And so we did also get another video submission. And again, for those who were not able to submit their stories, but are interested in still submitting your stories, please send them to FANHS Oregon so that they can capture those stories as well. And so this video actually comes to us from the Filipino Catholic community of Oregon. And so I would love to hear what they have to say for us. I know that they're a huge part of the Filipino American community here. And so thank you to the Filipino Catholic community of Oregon to sending that video to us. We know that it's not a simple or easy thing to put together a video or capture all of the many wonderful things that everyone is doing during this time. And if we can go to the next slide, please. And so some of the other organizations that we were able to highlight in last week's segment was also the Oregon Filipino American Lawyer Association. We got to hear from Nikki De Leon of the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. We also got to hear from the Philippine American Chamber of Commerce, the Calabarzon Foundation of the Pacific Northwest, the Ingangleti Project. We also had our wonderful speaker, Roger Rigor, from the Foundation for Philippine Progress. And we also got to hear from the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers. And so really, again, reflecting of what we captured, reflecting how diverse the Filipino community is here in Oregon, and all of the different things that the Filipino community is doing to serve everyone during this time. And so we also got to see in that webinar that, again, this isn't the exhaustive or comprehensive list of Filipino community organizations or a reflection of all the things that Filipinos do to serve the communities at large, and that there are many individuals that take up various forms of service that do go unrecognized, and there is a strength and humbleness in the character of Filipinos. So may we continue to meet and learn from one another and continue building and serving our communities. And before we closed out of last week's installment, FANHS Oregon also got to present their Sinagdala Award to Janice Mason, the president of PACO, who has done so much to serve the Filipino and Greater Oregon community. Next slide, please. And so through these last two webinars, we've really seen how determined and compassionate the Filipino community is, and continues to be in the face of adversity. Here we have a post from Governor Kate Brown recognizing the students from the University of Portland and the celebration of Filipino heritage, and noting how this year things are really different. And this year is certainly one for the history books. And we'll also notice that heritage and history tend to be used interchangeably at times. And I just want to share that without history, heritage is lost. And so we're writing a little bit of history every single day. And in order to know where we are going, we must know where we have been. And that is why we have taken you all on this journey with us, from the past to the present and on to the future. And with that, we'll switch gears and learn more about the Malaya Movement. Next slide, please. So if you were able to join us for our first segment of BAYANI 2020, Honoring Our Heroes, you heard me introduce myself and briefly talk about the Malaya Movement and Malaya Movement Portland. For those of you that are not familiar and have been wanting to know more, well, you're in for a treat. So Malaya Movement Portland is a regional chapter of the Malaya Movement, the US movement against killings and dictatorship and for democracy in the Philippines. The Malaya Movement came together in February 2018 in response to the extrajudicial killings resulting from President Duterte's drug war, and we're actively fighting for a free and democratic Philippines. On this slide, you see a huge mass of people who are gathered together locally on the Hawthorne Bridge to do a banner drop that reads, "Defend Philippine Sovereignty," alongside the little tiny blue Malaya Movement banner and various organizational flags that support the Malaya Movement. And so local Filipino Americans and allies came together as we continue to see the ways in which Duterte was harming our kababayan and families back in the Philippines. first through his drug war and then through foreign sales and deals and disputes with other countries. This banner drop was in response to Duterte's subservience to China, despite the Hague ruling that, that favored the Philippines in a dispute that has been long contested over the islands in the West Philippine Sea, more commonly referred to as the South China Sea. In this situation, Duterte failed to assert Philippine sovereignty against the aggression of the Chinese state. And we've also been examining the actions of the Duterte administration during this time, and how his regime has really utilized our tax dollars to cause more damage than service to the Filipino people. And so we want to continue to see the ways in which Duterte, or we continue to see, we don't want to continue, but we do continue to see the ways in which Duterte puts a price tag on the lives of the Filipino people, both in the home country as well as in our host countries overseas. And so all of that to say, these are two of Malaya Movement's 6 points of unity, referencing the Stop the Killings and Defend Philippine Sovereignty against all foreign powers. The other 4 are No to Fascist Dictatorship, Scrap the Executive Order 70, Memorandum Order 32, and all other de facto martial law policies, including the most recent legislation that people have been seeing and hearing more and more about against the rights and welfare of the Filipino people, the anti-terror law. And then we also want to bring an end to the corruption and the practice of political dynasty in the Philippines, and we stand for genuine democracy. Hence the name Malaya Movement, because Malaya means free. And so I happen to be one of the regional co-coordinators of the Malaya Movement Portland, and we're currently forming 3 local chapters here in Portland, and we're very excited to be with you all this evening. And if we can move to the next slide. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce one of our members from the Southeast Forming Chapter, BMO. BMO is a 24-year-old gender fluid Filipinx gay. They enjoy all kinds of art and deconstructing systems of oppression. They're a small human with a big heart. BMO, the floor is yours.
BMO, I think you are muted.
How am I now? Great. Well, again, hi, I am BMO. I'm a part of the Malaya Southeast chapter. I joined a couple of months ago amidst the fascist rise of what's going on domestically in America. Posts from Malaya have started to circulate on my social media regarding fascism within the Philippines. And after learning more about it, felt very passionately and decided to get involved. I am a first generation Filipino American. My mom is from Talisay and my dad is from Cebu. And I still have a lot of family over there. So it's really important to me to fight fascism on all fronts. Recently, our chapter has created a zine, basically a mini magazine of information, and have printed out over 100 copies to disperse around Portland, just to help have people be more aware of the situation that's going on in the Philippines, the parallels to what that has here, and America's direct involvement with perpetuating fascist dictatorship from Duterte. So we hope to be able to continue to do that, make more zines with more information and t-shirts, all of those cool things. but it feels really good to be a part of Malaya, and I hope that more people join our chapter soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, BMO. It's always wonderful to hear the reasons why people join organizations and more about what we're striving for. And so if we can move to the next slide, please. So next up, I'm happy to introduce my other half in this work, Tabitha Elord Ponciano, who is one of the coordinators of Malaya Portland, and she sits on Malaya Movement US National Secretariat as the National Finance Officer. Tabs has dedicated her life to fighting for human rights and democracy in the Philippines in the face of growing fascism and for genuine democracy in her homeland. Tabs grew up in Barangay, Manila, and immigrated to the US as a teenager. She moved to Portland to study at Lewis and Clark College back in 2011, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies and Art. Tabs, the floor is yours.
Thanks, V. My better half, I would say. So yeah, I'm Tabs. I've been an organizer or an activist with the Malaya Movement since early 2019, but my journey to becoming involved with being an activist for human rights in the Philippines started a couple of years before that. I was pushed to join the Malaya Movement, however, when I saw the devastating violence continue to escalate in the Philippines, particularly the war on drugs that Veronica mentioned earlier. I grew up in Manila, in Parañaque. Some of my closest friends, childhood friends, were kids who lived in squatters areas near my house. I could look over the fence and I would see, the shanty towns that most of y'all are familiar with. I also know that majority of those who've been killed under the war on drugs are the kids who grew up in those squatters areas, Tondo being the epicenter of the war on drugs. While the President Duterte has said that the only solution to rampant drug use is through punishing and killing drug users and pushers, I know and hope that people here do too, that isn't the answer. It's a Band-Aid solution to a systemic problem. This war on drugs has been recognized now widely as a human rights issue that can't be ignored, from the United Nations to the European Union, and even our very own Senator Merkley back in 2018, who released a statement condemning the outright violence. As I learned more, I began to understand that there are deeply embedded problems in the Philippine socioeconomic system. Talking to my family about what's happening there, the common response is, it's so corrupt. We can't do anything about it anymore, especially as people already in the US. How many of y'all have heard that before? But as someone who loves the Philippines and the Filipino people, I know that can't be true. We can't be hopeless in the face of struggle, right? We can do something even from the US. So organizing or being an activist has taught me that through people power, we can make change in our society, that by coming together, we can make and do something bigger, like we're doing this past month together. A question that's come to mind as I was preparing to talk to y'all tonight, and maybe you're asking that same question right now as you listen to me and us talk about the Malaya Movement, is why is the future of Phil-Am communities in the US one that fights for the rights of Filipinos in the Philippines? And my answer to that question is because we are Filipinos who just happen to live in the US. No matter your migration stories, our roots are in the Philippines. Perhaps this is a simplistic answer, but I really believe this to be true. One of the readings that actually really helped me understand this is Carlos Bulusan's work, America's in the Heart. When I read that, I was like on break at work and I just started bawling. It gave me a perspective on the plight of migrant workers and of immigrants in general in a country like the US. After I read that, I felt the pain of being separated from family come up again, as Bulusan painfully but beautifully illustrates in America's in the Heart, because I myself spent nearly a decade away from my own father before I immigrated here. I also felt hope, most of all. So when I read the points of unity of the Malaya Movement that V talked about earlier, I knew this was the organization that I wanted to be a part of. To be an activist, to me, means not just calling out the ineptitude of our governments. That is just one small part of it. To me, it means fighting for the things that we want to see in the world. One that really stands out to me from the points of unity is standing for genuine democracy, a democracy that is for and by the people of the Philippines. And the Philippines has not been given that privilege in a very long time. To be in community with people who desire to see others uplifted so that we can build a future and a society that benefits everyone, where families don't have to pick through trash heaps to find food, which is often the case, especially in Tondo or Smoky Mountain in Manila, where people get the necessary supplies to continue to do their jobs safely, unlike the story of the seafarers we heard last week, where mothers, fathers, lolas, and lolos don't have to leave their families for years to just to send money back. This is one of the most heartbreaking things I've experienced this year, is that because my family immigrated to the US, I had to watch my grandmother pass away over Zoom. And that's just like an experience that I don't want other people to experience as well. And so as we look at our history, as we learned our history this past month, and the wonderful things our community has done in response to COVID here in Oregon, I'm inspired because the Phil-Am community here embodies part of what I'm fighting for. A community that will go above and beyond for each other, whether we are in a pandemic, in response to a natural disaster, or when we all just want to celebrate our victories and our contributions. It's truly has been inspiring to see. And seeing and being with my community is really what keeps me driving and fighting for human rights and democracy in the Philippines, and fighting and being part of the Malaya Movement allows me to do that. So that's it. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Tabitha, for sharing your story and why you take up this work. I think that for any of us that serve the community or just take actions to do something caring for someone else, the question that I've always come back to in organizing work is, for whom do we do this work? And it really does come down to our personal stories. And so we'll move on to the next slide, where we'll have a cultural performance. We would now like to share this video with you all that was put together by a Seattle-based music duo, Sende Era. Era participated as a member of Kabataan Alliance in joining the Malaya Movement to take action alongside thousands of Filipinos and allies to denounce President Duterte's State of the Nation address back in 2019. The Malaya Movement had called for a National Day of Action in which 8 protests and events took place across the United States. The US actions also joined more than 25 international actions worldwide, all of which the participants gathered to call for Duterte's ouster and to condemn his drug war, which has claimed over 30,000 lives. And really putting out the urgent call to put an end to Duterte's all-out war on the people of the Philippines. So let's go ahead and play the video.
All I wanna do is find love, but they telling me the world is drugged up. They're killing us one by one. So tell me, is this love or is it fucked up? Yeah, all I wanna do is feel free, but we turning on the screen and see bodies on the streets. Yeah, they say my country here is still free. Yeah, those who pushing peace turn the bodies in the streets. Yeah, they don't want us to feel free. We working overseas, returners bodies in the streets. Yeah, they want it drug-free. Their solution make fear with the bodies in the streets. They say one thing, then another one falls. It ain't one thing, it's everything that they hold. It ain't one name, it's the suns we let shine. Daughters of a country, color your anytime. Turn on the news today, saw another body in the news today. Show me something new today. Show me something, yeah. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love. Yeah. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love. All we wanna do is feel free. Now we turning on the screen, see everybody in the streets now. Yeah, they say my country ain't free, so my people pushing peace with everybody in the streets now. Yeah, we want us all to feel free, so we working overseas, join everybody in the streets now. Yeah, we want us all to be free, our solution make peace, everybody in the streets. They say one thing, then another one falls. It ain't one thing, it's everything that they hold. It ain't one name, it's the suns we let shine. Daughters of a country, color your anytime. Turn on the news today, saw everybody in the news today. Show me something new today. Show me something, show me something. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love. Yeah. Now show me where is love. Now show me where is love.
Hindi ka malaya. Mahaba lang ang tanikala.
Wow, what an incredible video. Definitely be sure to check out more of their work and support your local artists. That video really makes me think about how much has really happened in the span of 1 to 2 years since the Malaya Movement started building. Because I think this year there were actions in 9 different cities, and this is all under COVID. And we are starting to see more and more chapters forming all over the country in response to the conditions in the Philippines and the responsibilities that we have as Filipino Americans to rise for justice here in the US, as well as in the Philippines and other parts of the world. Which really brings us into our next topic. So next, perfect, where we get to talk about the Philippine Human Rights Act and what are the local efforts to push this forward. And so on this slide, we see a group photo capturing how the Portland Human Rights Commission voted in favor of a resolution to suspend military aid to the Duterte regime. And so this photo was taken in January of this year. And if we move to the next slide, you'll get to see an excerpt of the letter that the Portland Human Rights Commission wrote, urging the federal government to suspend United States, sorry, having a little trouble with my screen. But where the Human Rights Commission of Portland urged our federal government to suspend the United States security assistance with the Philippines until such a time as human rights violations by Philippine security forces cease and the responsible state forces are held accountable. And so you can learn more about this this resolution and just connect with the local legislative steering committee. But we'll go ahead and kind of run through the other things that have been happening just in this year alone. And so if we'll move to the next slide. And so on this slide, you get to see the local support that we've gained from both Representative Blumenauer as well as Bonamici, who both signed and supported Representative Jan Schakowsky's letter that spoke out and condemned the anti-terror law that had been passed in July 2020. And then if we move to the next slide. So in September, moving from July to September, in that time, we were able to get Representative Susan Wild to introduce HR 8313, more commonly known as the Philippine Human Rights Act. And so we'd like to share a short clip with you all. We can play the video.
Rodrigo Duterte's brutal regime is using the pretext of a so-called anti-terrorism law to ramp up efforts targeting labor organizers, workers, and political opponents. In response to these abuses, I introduced the Philippine Human Rights Act, which would block U.S. funding for police or military assistance to the Philippines, outlining a series of basic criteria which would have to be met in order to resume such funding. Let us stand with the people of the Philippines.
And so after Representative Wild introduced the Philippine Human Rights Act, we saw dozens of representatives signing on to sponsor, including Representative Bonamici. Next slide, please. And so now we will hear from members of the local legislative steering committee and why they're involved and support the passing of the Philippine Human Rights Act. Our first speaker is Sofia Vicencio. Sophia is 27, born in Illinois, moved to Portland in 2013, is a member of Gabriela Portland, BAYANI Portland, and the local legislative team. Sophia's papa moved from Manila to Illinois on a Fulbright scholarship in the 80s. And Sophia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Malaya Movement, and for FANHS for having me. My name is Sophia. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, I am on the steering committee for the local legislative work in Portland. We are pushing for the Philippine Human Rights Act to be introduced in the Senate side in Oregon with our Oregon senators. But I'm also a member of Gabriela Portland, and Gabriela is we are the center of the militant women's movement struggling for national sovereignty, democracy, and the full liberation of women. But there are more than 200 organizations, so more than 200 of us, institutions, desks, and programs of women all over the Philippines seeking to build a mass movement, recognizing the three root problems of the Philippines and address the rights and welfare of Filipino women through education, organizing, campaigns, and cultural work. This movement primarily relies on the foundational backbone of women's mass movement, and it also recognizes the participation of the toiling women as significant to advance the militant, democratic, and patriotic movement of women throughout the archipelago. So that is Gabriela, and there are many reasons why we are so adamant about supporting the Philippine Human Rights Act, specifically for reasons of wanting to suspend U.S. security assistance to the Philippines until all of these human rights violations by Philippine security officials cease and the responsible state forces are held accountable. You know, like Tabs was saying, this is something we cannot ignore. This is something we cannot leave the Filipinos behind. And so this is our way of, it's another way of addressing the system and addressing the conflict with the U.S. government and Filipinos who are trying to exist out here. So and I can also name a few different examples of this as well. Earlier in the last 5 years, I don't remember the exact year, but there was a woman known as Jennifer Laude, and she was killed by a U.S. soldier, Joseph Scott Pemberton, and Pemberton is walking free in the States. He was actually pardoned by Duterte earlier in this fall. I believe it was September. So Gabriela is always fighting for justice for Jennifer Laude. We want her. We want justice for her, as well as the LGBTQ folks in the Philippines and also here. Earlier this year in June, during Pride Month, in the Philippines, the Bahagari group in the Philippines was protesting the Philippine government, protesting against the anti-terror law, which flags anyone who dissents against the Philippine government. Why do I keep saying the U.S.? Protesting against the Philippine government, and they were arrested. There were 20 protesters in June who were arrested in the Philippines for peacefully protesting the government and also the terror bill, which was a bill at the time. They were trying to prevent it from becoming law. Additionally, there are a number of different Filipino women and Filipino human rights activists in the Philippines who are seen as political prisoners. They are political prisoners and they're not safe in the Philippines from their own government. Specifically, one comes to mind, but there are so many. Reina May Nacino, who is a political prisoner. She's an activist who's been incarcerated. She gave birth in prison to Baby River, and Baby River passed away this year. And Reina only had 6 hours of furlough to put her baby to rest. And so, with all of these different people and communities within this movement that we're in, we want the Philippine Human Rights Act to at least be the start of all of these injustices. We want those to be seen and highlighted. We want the U.S. Duterte regime to end the military relationship altogether, and we want the people who are responsible for all of these different things, we want those to be held accountable. And so that's what we're fighting for. We want the terror tags to stop, and we need to be able to protest the government, the Philippines and the US, because we're also affected by this too. We need this to stop. We need to feel safe, and we need a better system right now, because like Tabitha was saying, we can't ignore this. And under the current system we're in, especially with COVID, we're not protected. Filipinos, least of all, are not protected. And so that is my soapbox. And thank you so much for having me. I will be available for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I think that anytime that we're talking about community organizing or supporting our communities, we're also talking about accountability and why during struggles the community continues to have to show up for itself. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. And so now we'll move to our next slide, and we will hear from Art De La Rosa, who is a recent University of Oregon graduate, a member of Malaya Movement Portland, and sits on the local legislative steering committee as well. And let's hit play and hear from Art.
Hello, my name is Art De La Rosa, and as a Filipino American, I find it important to bring to the US government's attention the human rights violations that are happening in the Philippines. I think that by passing the Philippines Human Rights Act, it will be the first step in holding the Philippine government responsible for their actions. It may seem hard living in the US to enact change in the Philippines, but By helping to pass the FRA, it will have a direct impact on the lives of fellow Filipinos. And it being October and Philippine American Heritage Month, it's more important now, more than ever, to bring awareness to this issue by going to the Philippine Human Rights Act website. You can sign the petition and share it with your family and friends and help bring to light the human rights violations that are happening in the Philippines now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Art. And for those that are interested in learning more and referencing the link that Art and Sophia mentioned, you can see that dropped in the chat. And also you can click on tinyurl.com/PHRA petition. And so with that, we'll move to our next slide and our final speaker from the Legislative Steering Committee, Justin Low. Justin Low, pronouns he, him, is a Filipino and Chinese American who was born and raised in Oregon. He graduated from the University of Portland with a degree in political science and psychology and was a member of FASA SAYUP, and served as the Secretary General of Northwest FASA. In addition to his work with the Kabataan Alliance as a volunteer staffer in Portland, he currently works as a political consultant for local and state elected officials and as a criminal defense paralegal. He is committed to pushing through the PHRA, advancing criminal justice reform, and elevating student and youth voices in politics and policymaking. Justin, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you, Veronica, for that way too long of an introduction that I gave you in the bio. As Veronica mentioned, my name is Justin Low. I am a volunteer staffer for the Kabataan Alliance here in Portland, and specifically on legislative advocacy and organizing. I started my community organizing around the Philippines and Filipino identity at the University of Portland when I was a part of FASA SAYUP there, and have continued since then in combination with a lot of my local and state political work. But specifically with the Kabataan Alliance, it is a national alliance of Filipino youth and student organizations that is dedicated to serving our communities both here in the United States and back home in the Philippines. Three of the main pillars that we sort of organize our membership around are to educate about our people's culture and history, as is the theme of tonight's event and has been for this month. Uniting through building connections and coalitions with other student and youth organizations, as well as the ones that you've heard about here today. And lastly, taking action in advancing the rights and the welfare of Filipinos and the Philippines through campaigns and projects, which actually brings us to our support and conversation around the Philippine Human Rights Act. The PHRA is very important for multiple reasons that you've already heard of. And there are two reasons that I'd like to share with you all tonight, one being my own personal thoughts and opinions on it, and then as well as why it is so important to the Kabataan Alliance's work. For me, as someone who had their mother leave the Philippines during the Marcos regime to come here to the United States because of human rights violations and because of wanting to seek a better life for herself and her family. I see this as a strong and tangible step in holding the Philippine government accountable to these human rights violations, and also it being a very necessary step in keeping the United States accountable in terms of where it spends its money. And to be quite honest, our money, our tax dollars that goes to funding these policing and militaristic actions that are harming our family members, relatives back home, and is suppressing the concepts of freedom of speech and freedom of expression that we so highly value here. And so that is my little backstory as to why I feel so passionate about supporting the PHRA. But then from the Kabataan Alliance perspective, you know, because we work with students and youth, and we're working on elevating and uplifting their voices and their leadership and their futures, it is so incredibly important that they are able to assemble, to express themselves, to stand up for their future and their rights. A lot of you, I'm sure you've seen throughout this year with the civil rights movements happening around the killings of George Floyd and all the other issues that we have seen here in the States this year. A lot of them have been led by youth and students. And it is through word of mouth, through organizing on social media, through campaigning, through speeches, through emails and letters. And the fact that this new anti-terror law prohibits anything of that sort that could, quote unquote, incite someone to commit terrorism is unacceptable. And not only is it unacceptable, it is a denial of the fundamental human rights that all of us should be able to enjoy, both here in the United States and in the Philippines. And since youth and students are at the forefront of that, and they are fighting for the future Philippines that they will be living in, it is integral to the Kabataan Alliance to be in support of the PHRA and their efforts. And so for all of you, if you could check out that link that has been dropped and mentioned already, and share that with your family, friends, and organizations, that would be wonderful in terms of our efforts. And from our side of things, the Kabataan Alliance here in Portland has been working with the university organizations, as well as some of the other youth and working organizations here in Portland and across Oregon, and in alliance with some of our neighbors in Washington and Seattle, to ensure that our students and youth know how to contact their Congress people and have the knowledge and tools to be able to speak about the PHRA, and then let their Congress people know why they should be supporting this bill in the United States Congress. And so thank you very much for allowing me to share my story and the work that we are doing with the PHRA at the Kabataan Alliance.
Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your own personal reasons for supporting the PHRA, but also for talking about the Kabataan Alliance. I know that we've made several references to the Kabataan Alliance throughout this webinar series, and so it only seems right to officially hear more about the Alliance and what you all are doing. Especially as youth and students, really organizing for a better future. And so, so with that, we have learned a little bit more about what is the Malaya Movement and what are the local efforts here in Portland related to legislation that's being passed that is specifically looking at the human rights situation in the Philippines and how our role as Filipino Americans contribute to that through our tax dollars, and wanting to be more involved in how we shape the world we live into today. And so let's move to our next slide as we begin to close out our program, where we have our very exciting and final gift giveaway. And so drum roll, please. So we've almost reached the end of tonight's program, but before we begin to wrap up, we have our gift giveaway. And actually, the slide doesn't correctly display everything that we are giving away tonight. So to be more clear, we actually are giving away 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. We are giving away the Fork and Spoon gift card, and then we are also giving away the final Tinickling dance DVD. And so with that, we'll go ahead and have Anne click on spin the wheel, and we'll go ahead and see who all our final winners will be. And so for the first $50 Amazon gift card, let's go ahead and spin that wheel. So it looks like our first $50 Amazon gift card is going to go to Dory Osia Lim. So Dory, if you can just be sure to send an email to malayapdx@gmail.com with your email, we'll make sure that we are.
Hey, before you're not using the list that I've put out, Veronica.
Sorry, that was my fault.
Yeah, we might we
No,
might hit on someone that's repeat. Yeah, if you could grab the cleaner list, please. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, just to remind people, you had to be registered prior to the webinar as well as be in attendance.
Yes. So while we get that situated for you all, yes, just a reminder that if you're registered for tonight's event before this afternoon and you're currently in attendance, you have automatically been entered in tonight's gift giveaway. And so before we spin the wheel, just want to clarify, it looks like Dory is not on, so we'll go ahead and circle back to our first giveaway. Thank you everyone for your patience. So for the first $50 Amazon gift card, let's spin the wheel. For winning the first $50 Amazon gift card. Be sure to email malayapdx@gmail so that we can get that over to you. And then we'll go ahead and give away our Fork and Spoon gift card. So let's spin the wheel and see who wins. Is Dr. Eileen Duldulau. Congratulations, Dr. Eileen. And then we'll move to our second $50 Amazon gift card and spin the wheel. Gift card goes to Becky. Becky, I don't see your last name, but taking a quick look at this. Oh, I don't have your last name on the participants list either, but please be sure to send an email to malayapdx@gmail and we can get that over to you. And so our final Tinickling dance DVD, let's go ahead and take a look and see who the winner will be. Go ahead and send malayapdx@gmail.com your mailing address. That way we can mail you your gift. All right, now we are down to our last $50 Amazon gift card and the last gift giveaway for Filipino American History Month. Let's spin the wheel and see who our winner is. And again, just send malayapdx@gmail.com an email and we can get that over to you. Thank you so much, Anne, for spinning the wheel. And so we've just got a couple more slides for you. I know we're a little bit over time, but we did want to be sure to give a proper thank you. But of course, before that, if we could just have folks fill out our survey, we would love to hear from you all and what you've thought of this webinar series, and if there is more that you would like to see from FANHS Oregon and Malaya Movement Portland. And then next slide, please. And so we really wanted to make sure that people know who all is behind the scenes. And so if you'd like to get in touch with FANHS Oregon, please email them at oregonfans@gmail.com. You can also connect with them on Facebook at FANHS Oregon. And then if we go to the next slide, let's take a look at all of the wonderful officers that we have that make up the Filipino American National Historical Society Oregon chapter. So we have President Jimmy Lim, we have Vice President Ligaya Humbert, we have Secretary and Web Administrator Ray Santos, and then on the next slide, we have Treasurer Mary Catherine Moore, we have Auditor Corey Lalagan, and then we have National Trustee Lourdes Markley. And then if we move to the next slide. And then of course, you've heard from some of the members of Malaya Movement Portland. And if we move to the next slide, you can get in touch with myself or Tabs if you are interested in learning more about the Malaya Movement or becoming a member. You can reach us in many ways. Our email has been said many times, and then we're also on Instagram and Facebook, and then you can check out the national website, malayamovement.com. And then next slide. So again, we really want to send a huge thank you to all of our generous sponsors who were able to add a little fun to this webinar series with our gift giveaways. So major thank yous to the Manila Fiesta Filipino Food Restaurant, the Joy of Massage, AARP Oregon, and then on the next slide, we also want to do a special thank you to Fork and Spoon and Shop Halo Halo. And then as we bring everything to a close in our next slide, we do want to just give that one last reminder for folks to reach out to the Foundation for Philippine Progress to respond to their calls for donation regarding Super Typhoon Rolly. And so with all of this, we thank you all so much for joining us, joining FANHS Oregon and Malaya Movement Portland to commemorate Filipino American History Month, and really seeing the ways in which when we come together as a group of people, we are really able to create change. We're really able to support those in need, and we're really able to uplift ourselves. And in this time, it's a very historical period. And so we encourage everyone to connect with the organizations that we were able to highlight. Again, if you were an organization that was not able to share your story, or even if you are an individual that is not a part of an organization and you'd like to share your story, please get in contact with FANHS Oregon, and we would love to be able to share your story. So thank you, everyone. We hope that you get to close out these last few hours of Filipino American History Month and celebrate with your loved ones. Thank you and good night.